Rationalizing is another topic that you need to understand to be able to do the homework assignment. You may remember that when you have a radical in the denominator, the convention was always to try to rationalize the denominator or get the radical out of the denominator. And we learn to do that by multiplying by the number 1. But in this case, we'd want to make the number 1 look like radical 2 over radical 2, because radical 2 times radical 2 is 2. And then in the numerator, we'd end up with 1 times radical 2. And if you put 1 divided by radical 2 in your calculator and radical 2 divided by 2 in your calculator, you'll find you come up with the same answer. This is rationalized, this is not. What you're going to be doing in your homework are questions that look more like this. Same concept, a little bit different because we got variables, but you would still use that same idea of multiplying by the number 1 in the form of the square root of y plus 2 over the square root of y plus 2. When you multiply your denominator, then it will just become y plus 2, and your numerator, you have 7y times the square root of y plus 2. Rationalized, not rationalized. If your denominator is a binomial, then in order to rationalize the denominator, you need to use the conjugate. The conjugate looks like the same radicals with the opposite sign in between. So this would be the square root of 5 minus the square root of 6. And that's the conjugate of the square root of 5 plus the square root of 6. But we need to make it the number 1, so we'll put that up top also. Multiplying by the number 1 will help rationalize this denominator without changing its value. So the numerator, I don't like to distribute, so I would leave that 3 outside of a set of parentheses rather than distributing it in. And the denominator, when you multiply this binomial times this binomial, you have to FOIL. But you use the conjugate because when you multiply first times first and get 5, and multiply radical 5 times negative radical 6 and radical 6 times positive radical 5, your outer and your inner add to 0, and then your last radical 6 times negative radical 6 is negative 6. So you simplify to 3 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 6 over negative 1, or negative 3 times the square root of 5 times the square root of 6. Rationalized, not rationalized.